Okay, so that's started. And once again, our first lecture today is Ashwini Ramesh from GiveMe5.ai. And go ahead and take it away, Ashwini.
Thank you so much. So hello, everyone. So today we are going to talk about a topic, obviously, which we all can't live without, food. Who doesn't like food, right? So food, I mean, for astronauts or for someone who go out of Earth, it's not that easy to get the food or whatever they like, right? So how do we manage that? And first of all, we'll begin with a question. Why do we need food? You can answer maybe in the chat or in the, yeah, I think so. The chat should work for all of you. So give me an answer. What do you think? Why do you need food? I want to see some interesting answers there. Maybe you need food because you're just bored. You want to eat and feel happy. Or what do you think? Why do we need to eat food? Very simple question. Okay. I don't see any answer. Ah, there. Brian, calories, nutrition, energy. True, very true. Joshua says for energy. That's right. Right, exactly. For energy to function, obviously. Food gives us the energy to maintain home status. Okay, maybe I get that right, hopefully. Shreya, okay, thank you. That's right. We need food to grow up. Yeah, Claudia, obviously, that's right. So as you all are saying, that's right, we need food because it gives us, it's a source of energy, in short. So therefore, what are the ways that we can supply food for someone who's out there, right? So definitely there are two ways that we can give this food, either a processed food, like, or a packed food, which is readily packed and ready to eat kind of a thing, or a raw food like plant or meat. This is something that we have even at home, right? So we have some ready-made food, ready to eat kind of a thing, like a soup or a noodle or something like that. You know, you just go heat it up and you consume it. Or there could be like raw food, like plant or meat that you cook, you make a very delicious meal and you enjoy. So obviously, why should astronauts be denied of this basic necessity? I would say, I wouldn't say it as a luxury anymore. It is necessity now, isn't it? And how long does it take to travel all the way to Mars? What do you think? That's another question. How long does it take to travel on an average from Earth to Mars? Okay. Oh, very nice. Everyone is agreeing. Everyone says 6 months. Yeah, approximately 6 to 7 months. Yes, that's right. So that long of a travel and without food, you'll really, I mean, without good food, you feel you don't have that motivation to go ahead, right? So how do we get the food there, right? So there has to be a rule, especially. Let's talk first about the packed food, which is easy, obviously. So there are certain rules that you have to follow when you're packing your food. That is, it has to be compact so that you can put in more other things, maybe your science experiments, right? Instead of just the food there. So it has to be compact. The volume matters, right? And it has to be lightweight. Obviously, we care for weight a lot. And then because these things directly relate to money. Then we need it to be nutritional, like all of you guys pointed out. It gives nutrition, so it has to be nutritional. You just can't send them a pack of chips, which is not containing a good amount of nutrition in it. It should not be powdery. Let's think, why not powdery? What's wrong? I mean, on Mars, it shouldn't be a problem. Mars still has gravity, so not a worry. But during the space journey, they need to have food which is not powdery. Obviously, because the powders can float easily, then they can cause some irritations if it enters into eyes or nose, right? So we want to avoid powdery food. It has to be tasty. Yeah, there is a typical thing that we say that astronauts or those who travel in space, they don't feel the taste. People usually think that, you know, they don't find anything tasty. So it just takes a while for them to adjust. It's not the fact. So they do need tasty food, right? Or else, again, they'll not be motivated to do anything. The food should be long lasting. Yes, it should not be like something that has to be consumed in a day or two, because 6 months of journey, has to be long lasting. Okay, that's about the rules. And you can see over here, I have a small image of food that was sent in Mercury and Gemini mission, which was the early mission, the first mission with astronauts. And at that time, the packaging were made up of, you can see over here, some tubes. One of my students was saying that it looks like paint tubes. Yeah, it does look like that. But in reality, it is filled with food. Okay, so some kind of gravy kind of a food, yeah, curry kind of a thing, yeah. So, but nowadays it has improved. Aluminum tubes are a bit heavy, so we can go for other replacement for that. Okay, and before we move further, I have some videos to show you so that you get ideas for your design. Okay, so I'll quickly share the screen sound there and here. Yes. That's when the astronauts were trying to make pizza in space. Right? Enjoy this. Yeah, so cooking in space would be fun, especially during that 6 months of journey, right? Or maybe something like this. Like you can see what is.
Welcome back to Expedition.
How do they eat the food? For example, we are going to see what are the different types of food as we go further. What all the equipments do they have for heating, for cooling? So take a look at that too.
62 on the International Space Station. Tonight we thought we would show you a little bit about some meal prep, what we do for meals on board the space station. How do we prepare our food? So the answer is, we have a great variety of food up here.
Two different general types of food, thermostabilized food in these green packets that's very similar to military MREs or meals ready to eat. And then we also have freeze-dried food.
So all of the water content has been sucked out. This is just basic asparagus, so we need to add the water back in. We want to make sure all that water is mixing in, and then we usually put it here inside the food warmer.
And then we have refrigerated space here. They've been nice enough to allow us to use these just for food. All right,
Dinner
the dinner
time.
table.
Some Turkish fish stew. I have butternut squash.
All right, and I'm having, I have rice with butter, some lentil soup, and grilled chicken patty. A lot of the Russian food comes in cans. This was one of my favorites. This is spicy beef and rice.
Space makes eating a lot more fun. You can turn your spoon upside down, or even let it go, and nothing's gonna fall off. You can eat in any direction. You can eat upside down if I want to.
Yeah, so those are some, easy videos that you can find it there. So why did I show you all that? Because I know you guys are going to make your Mars camp, isn't it? So that needs to include all these equipments there. So do remember this. Okay, so let's go further and see what are the ways that we can pack these foods. Okay, so one thing that we have is rehydratable. I'm sure you all observed that, right? She had this asparagus in a pack, and the astronaut was like filling it with water and then turned it into mushy, and so she could consume it. So those are rehydratable ones. Because when you are sending it in space, if you add water into it, water is heavy, so you don't want to add up water. So what do we do instead? We take the all the moisture out of this, for example, from peas or this concentrated orange drink. You have it in a powder, right? So then when you send it over there, first of all, it's compact, it's going to be lightweight. It is easy to send it because liquids usually spill off. So this is much better. And then you rehydrate it whenever you want to consume that. It's vacuum packed now, you can see that, right? So that is rehydratable. You can water it again. Then we also have thermostabilized food. Like you saw that guy who was eating this something made up of beef kind of a thing. So, or generally the things that you find in supermarkets where you have like carrots or beans or some kind of beans, like mushrooms that are kept in a can. But when you open it, when you taste it, you'll understand that it is not raw, it is cooked. So what do? They usually cook it for like 2 or 3 minutes in a boiling water. That helps in removing all the germs, bacteria, or those insects or whatever might be present in them. So completely removed, and they seal it well so nothing enters later on. So that is thermostabilized with the heat. Or we can also have irradiated food. Irradiated food are those through which you pass radiation. For example, over here you can see a gamma rays is being passed through a strawberry. Gamma rays are those which can penetrate into very tiny space. It can penetrate through anything. So through that, it is going to kill the bacteria, and then it is vacuum packed, can be consumed. It can last for longer time, right? Or we can also have fresh food, like obviously, but yeah, there is a restriction for this. Astronauts love fresh food. Unfortunately, they cannot get it all the time. So this is an example from International Space Station where this, like oranges, apple, pear are sent to them through a cargo delivery, and immediately they have to consume it like within a week. As you all know, fresh food don't last longer. But yeah, they do enjoy that. So it is always supplied to those astronauts in that way. That might not be a possibility in our Mars expedition, but let's see if there is another way to that. Or we could also have natural form food, the food that you can't do anything, but they last long in their natural way, like dry fruits, isn't it? Or chocolates, M&Ms, that an example is given over here, which you can consume anytime, isn't it? So they last longer, and they occupy less space depending on the size of it. Or we could also have intermediate moisture. Intermediate moisture food are those in which you can't remove the juiciness completely. For example, this is apricot or some kind of meat in which you want the juiciness to stay there, but you can't use it like a rehydratable kind. That will not taste good. So we choose certain food which are not something that has too much of water content in it that it can leak off, but it has more viscosity in it and it can stay in that form, yet it is juicy. Okay, such type of food are also allowed through space travel, intermediate moisture. Or you could also have frozen food. Frozen food, like we all eat. This is a good example of quiche or some chicken pot. So those things which are quickly freeze it so that there is no much ice formation on top of it. You just have to heat it, warm it, and then it can be consumed. So these are already cooked food. I'm sure you all have such kind of food at home. Or we could have refrigerated food, such as cheese creams, right? So those are also possible. Unfortunately, the issue with space travel would be having a big refrigerator is not possible. As you observed in ISS also, they have small refrigerators and a small heating station, not even an oven, right? So because this consumes a lot of energy, so therefore we try to keep them as small as possible during the space travel. Okay, so these are about packed food. Definitely, we cannot stay only with packed food. We also need, okay, let's say the pros of packed food is it's immediately available. The cons would be disadvantages that it increases the weight during launch. Yes, imagine like you have to take food supply for 6 months. And not only that, once you land on Mars also, you would need a little bit of supply there. So that would be equivalent to a lot of people that you could take there, astronauts replacing them, or some science equipment is being replaced. So yeah, that's a disadvantage, the drawback of this. Okay, then moving on towards raw food, which is something you can get it on Mars, right there where you're having your station. That could be plant and meat. Both are possible. So let's look at the plant first. Yeah, okay. So definitely to grow some plants, we need, these are the basics, right? We need sunlight, we need nutrients, we need air and water. Okay, now coming to Mars, sunlight reaches there, but still, as you all already might know about this, it's cold. You know, the temperature itself is like very low. It goes too cold on the surface of the Mars in negatives, in negative temperatures. It can also reach that. So sunlight reaches, but not as efficient as on Earth. Nutrients, yes. Astronauts have found that the Mars soil is nutrient. It contains whatever is needed for the plants to grow, but unfortunately, we are not yet sure if that nutrient content is equally distributed in everywhere. It might be some part, but it might have something more or less. So a good research will give us, say you decide a particular part where you want to set up your camp, there you can find out how is the nutrition level and what type of crop can be grown there. Air, yeah, plants do need carbon dioxide, which is available on Mars, but sparse. The density on Mars, air density is very low. That's one thing that we need to think about. And water, liquid water. Yeah, so you need to place your station close to the water sites. Okay, then moving on towards what are the ways we can grow plants. Okay, we have three techniques have been studied very well. So I'll talk to you about each one of them: seed film, hydroponics, and aeroponics. Coming to seed film technology, because as you know, it's very difficult for seeds to stay in place, right? So therefore, what do they do here is that seeds are secured in plant pillows for the plant to grow inside a lab in the space station. So now this is, well, during the travel also, we could use something like that. So you can see there is a small strip on which the seed is glued to, okay? And the scientist is supplying nutrient-rich fluid to that. And that is placed inside a plant pillow, which contains all the, the soil that is required. Okay, and then, so for example, this is how it is sealed and placed. This contains Tokyo pecana, a cabbage and lettuce seeds that you can see over here. This is how it's placed. And observe something. It is already having these white taps that you see right over here. So those are the for pipe connections. So when you think like an engineer, you need to think in advance. What is all required? How are you going to supply the water? Right? How are you going to supply light to this? So all the things has to go ahead. Okay, now that's applied over here so that the soil gets nutrient rich and water rich. Okay, and here, so delicious lettuce have already been grown in space station, and astronauts have enjoyed eating that. You can see over here, this is how it looks like. I'll show you a short video so that you get an idea of the equipment that is required for all these things. So one thing is grow light, as you can see over here, the pink light that they are using for growing the plants. And there is a water connection pipe, a main pipe that goes in there, and it is distributed to all the plants there. It's kept automatic. And there is a cover so that nothing spills out. They also have a sample collector to see how the lettuce grown in space tasted like. So yeah, that was a success, and this is one of the methods, but this does require soil, especially if you're going to grow it in your space station. Let's say if you're growing it on Mars, you have enough soil there. We just need to know what is the content in that soil. So maybe you have a small soil testing equipment over there, so that you know what is the contains nutrients in it, and what type of plant is good for growth. Okay, that does require nutrients through soil, and it takes time for the plants to grow in such a condition naturally. But there is another method of growing plants which is called as hydroponics. Now, as soon as you look at the word, it comes to our mind that, oh my God, this is going to consume a lot of water. Why is she even telling me about this? No, in reality, it consumes very less water when compared to the natural farming methods. So you can save water. It doesn't require soil. That's good. You need not worry about nutrients in the soil and all those things. Less pesticides. Okay, higher yield. Yeah, this is what that is the thing I want to talk about. So here what happens is that you have a pipe or a place where you have water flowing in it. Okay, that's why it's called hydroponics. And in the water, you're going to add the nutrients required for plant growth. Okay, and then what you do is that water keeps on flowing, and the root of your plant is touching the water. So the root is going to absorb all the nutrients. Now the plant is sufficiently supplied with nutrients through the water, and therefore it grows quicker. Typically, a lettuce, if it takes it takes around 3 months to grow on soil, it takes just 30 to 32 days to grow in hydroponics method. Okay, so you can harvest faster. You have an unlimited supply of food, and you're going to use less water because the water is recycling, isn't it? Okay, so let me show you this method in detail, and through the video, I'm going to tell you the parts of the hydroponics method. Yes. Oh, there.
Hydroponics is a method of growing plants, usually crops.
So if you observe over here, these are the containers in which the plants are placed
Without soil. In this method, the crops or plants are grown on water rich in essential nutrients. According to studies, plants grown hydroponically grow faster and healthier than plants in the soil, since they are being provided with required nutrients directly to their roots through water. Nutrients are dissolved in this water.
So observe now, this is like the simple plate that is placed through the, like roots are dipped in the water and the water is flowing. Okay, they're spaced, they're given good space between each.
That surrounds the roots, so plants have easier access to the nutrition they need. Many different civilizations have utilized hydroponic growing techniques throughout history. The hanging gardens of Babylon, the floating gardens of the Aztecs of Mexico are examples of hydroponic culture. As the many benefits are realized, now scientists and horticulturalists are experimenting with different methods of hydroponics. It was even integrated into the space program by NASA, as they are considering the practicalities of growing food in long-term space missions. Hydroponics allows plants to grow up to 50% faster than they would in soil, and fresh organic produce can be harvested throughout the year. It also helps to produce higher yields than traditional soil-based agriculture and allows crops to grow in areas of the world that cannot support crops in the soil. Hydroponics is good for both environment and the grown product, since it eliminates the need for massive pesticide use compared to traditional soil-based agriculture. Hydroponic systems require only around 10% of the water that soil-based agriculture requires. The The water used in a hydroponic system can be reused, thereby reducing the need for more freshwater supply.
Now, if you observe over here, the hydroponic system can be stacked one on top of another, especially when you start to use grow lights. So plants need enough light to grow. So therefore, I mean, since we know the sunlight availability on Mars could be less intense, so therefore this is a good idea which can be grown indoor and stacked one on top of another. Okay, I'll continue.
It is also a great option when there is a lack of land or yard space for gardening, as it doesn't require a lot of space and can even be done indoors.
Okay, so that's about the hydroponic technique. And let's talk about another technique which is similar to hydroponics but even faster growth. That is called aeroponics. The word aeroponics gives us another hint, isn't it? Aero meaning it has water, sorry, it has air, through air. So if you observe, this is the way the system is arranged. And this is the inner view, inside view of this. Okay, when you see there is no water flowing inside. So how is it getting the water and the nutrients, especially? That is through the sprinkler that you see on the top. So it's going to sprinkle at every hourly once. It's just going to make sure that the roots are moist. But the sprinkler also the water contains nutrients within it, so it gets enough nutrients. This is even faster growth. It has even faster growth when compared to hydroponics and needs even less water. But let me tell you the disadvantage of these two methods. Hydroponics and aeroponics, though they have a higher yield, the disadvantage is it's too much dependent on the source, that is the nutrient source, that is water with nutrients. It's required. So even if the water stops for a few minutes, say 30 to 45 minutes also, immediately the plants are going to die. They lose their quality. Immediately it's gone. So it's very critical. You need to make sure you have good supply of water, the pumps. When you're making your your design, make sure you include all those details. Okay, include the pumps, include the grow lights. Make sure there is a battery backup for this. Okay. So another video on yeah, I still have time. Okay, let's see about the aeroponics technique. So you'll get some idea of designing of this technique, and then we will also go next towards meat. Okay. There.
Hey guys, my name is Geoffrey Arner, and I'm the greenhouse manager here at Copiana. And today I'm going to be helping y'all out with some of our most frequently asked questions. So one of the most common questions that we get here at Copiana is, what are we talking about when we refer to aeroponic farming? When we talk about aeroponics, we're talking about the type of system that our tower uses to grow our crops. In this type of system, the plants are suspended in air and water is delivered to them through a misting system.
So observe this technique. It's very cool. Okay, so there is a pump. There is water in the tank at the bottom. It supplies the water all the way to the top, pumps it up, and then due to gravity, it falls down, right? And this is not continuously done. It is like intermittently it is supplied. And when the water, you see over here, it's supplied to the roots, right? Yeah.
Generally in an aeroponic system, one of the characteristics that you'll have is a recycling of the water that you're using. So you're probably wondering, if that's an aeroponic system, then what's a hydroponic system? There's a couple key characteristics that differentiate the two. In a hydroponic system, the root structure of the plant is constantly submerged in water, while in our aeroponic system, the root structure is suspended in the air. While we deliver water throughout the day to our plants, a hydroponic system, its root structure is constantly in the water and it's getting aerated so those roots don't drown. So although recirculating water is a key characteristic of an aeroponic system, we still have to replenish our basins. As the mist hits the plants, they slowly uptake it, which drops the level of water in our reservoir over time. So we come by your property about once a week with around 10 gallons of water to fill you back up. So although our system looks untraditional, we can still grow all the traditional crops that you're used to. Basically anything that's above the ground we grow here at Copiana. 3 of our main categories are lettuce, hardy greens such as collards and kale, and herbs, things like mint and lavender. In the summer, we also like to make it fun and do stuff like tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers. So another common question we get is how long does it take until we're ready for a harvest event? Well, here at Copiana, we do everything from seed to finished crop. So in the first part of our process, it takes about 4 weeks for our seeds to germinate and get to a good size for your tower. Once we've transplanted into your tower, it takes about 4 more weeks until we're ready for your harvest event. One of my favorite things about these systems though is how sustainable they are. By using these towers, we're able to grow produce using 90% less water and 90% less space compared to traditional farming practices. Another thing that I love about the tower is the pump only has to run about an hour intermittently throughout the day. So when we put a farm on your property, we're not a huge power draw. Like with anything, there's definitely some advantages and disadvantages when choosing an aeroponic farming system. My biggest advantage is the speed in which I'm able to produce crops. In fact, a study from the University of Mississippi showed 30% increase in crop yield over 8 crops using the tower garden system, including kale and basil, both of which I grow here in the greenhouse. As far as the disadvantages, this system is modular, meaning it consists of many different pieces. This can be labor intensive to pull apart our tower and clean the growth chamber, but this is their only real disadvantage that I experience. Another common question that we get is where's the best place on my property for my farm? Well, the one thing that we have to have from you is a power source close to where we're going to be growing our crops. Other than this, our other considerations involve light and temperature. In the summer, we tend to grow outside. In the winter, we're growing inside with supplemental light. If you want to find a little bit more information.
So yeah, you can see over there, how did they keep it, with the light grow lights, the arrangements, you can see that. So yeah, this is another method of growing plants in space. Okay, and there are a lot of varieties that you can get through this method. Now coming to another interesting part of food that most of you might be thinking about is animals or meat. Definitely we can't take animals to space. I mean, it's so difficult to take humans to space with all those protections and things around. So taking animals, I know these are not something that you would eat. Okay, it's just a representation there. So taking animals to space would be very difficult, and it's not possible to. It's going to be expensive. Okay, so what is the other method? How about if we can grow meat in space? Most of you might have heard about this, and so yeah, there are a method called there is a nice company by name Aleph Farm. NASA also had a recent competition on various food ideas. So various food ideas to grow outer space, especially for meat lovers, right? So there were many people who came up and said that we can have plant-based meat. And I know some of them don't like this plant-based meat, no. So how about real meat and without killing the animals? So that was a good challenge, and therefore this company by the name Aleph Farm came up with a nice solution for this. So this is called as tissue culture. The tissues of the animal is collected, the tissue sample is collected, and in a grow chamber, you have a proper solution. You provide enough required fats and nutrients and proteins and things like that. You place that tissue in that solution, and for a week, if you leave it, it starts to grow there, and that can be consumed as a meat. It does. There are still a lot of research going on in that, but they are able to get it quite close to the real meat's taste. But all that depends is the amount of solution or the nutrients that you're going to supply for it for the growth. Okay, so this is one cool idea of Aleph Farm. Plans to build cell-based meat production facility or biofarm in space. Now, these are not only good for space, but they are also promoting it on Earth. Why not? When you need not slaughter any animal. That's a cool idea, isn't it? So let me show you about this. How does this work? Meat. How is meat grown in space? Growing meat. That's a cool thing, isn't it? This is a short video about Aleph Farm to detail.
Aleph Farms are excited to announce a game-changing moment in cellular meat history. We're getting closer to our vision of creating a cellular steak, providing the experience, look, and feel of the steak we all know.
We've successfully produced the first pieces of beef steak grown from natural cells without harming any animals. Meat is a complex tissue. This breakthrough includes various cell types found in conventional cuts of meat grown together outside the animal to form a 3D structure similar to meat, but using more sustainable, safe, and ethical methods. These first cell-based meat cuts demonstrate our capability of achieving our vision of growing steaks.
This meat had a great look and the original texture of a steak.
Finally, meat you can enjoy that's good for your health and the planet from Aleph Farms.
So yeah, that was just a trailer of what I was trying to say. But obviously, for your camp, for your project, you need to know more, right? How do they grow this? What does the facility look like? So let's take a look at that here.
What we're going to try today are the first thin slices of steaks we have produced in a lab setting.
I think this is going to be the greatest revolution in the history of modern agriculture.
This lab-grown meat is not just a plant-based alternative like the Impossible Burger.
There's a technology that exists that allows us to, for all intents and purposes, have our bacon and eat it too, without any pigs being harmed.
Cultured meat, lab-grown meat, clean meat, whatever you want to call it, is identical to conventional meat at the cellular level, just grown in a lab, no slaughter involved. Its arrival could have massive implications for meat eaters, the US's $200 billion meat industry, and the environment. And it's happening at a pivotal time.
We can't handle more agriculture, and this growing demand is asking precisely that, and we're going to reach a breaking point.
We're in San Francisco on our way to Just. The startup invited us to try its lab-grown chicken nuggets for the first time.
Just started out by making vegan alternatives to animal products, like mayo and scrambled eggs. But now they're entering a new market. They're producing actual meat grown from animal cells in a lab.
All right, Chef Chris, we're gonna cook up some cells.
I like to call it chicken.
Well, we'll see if it tastes like chicken.
This is our chicken bite. Got some breading on it right now.
Bam.
All right.
It's kind of fluffy on the inside, kind of airy on the inside.
Lab-grown meats start with a small cluster of cells that, like an embryo in a womb, needs proteins and nutrients in order to grow. The process generally begins with taking a tissue sample from a living animal. From that tissue sample, stem cells are isolated. From there, a nutrient-dense serum encourages the stem cells to multiply. Once a mass of cells is formed, it's fed with proteins that prompt the cells to differentiate into muscle and fat cells. After some time in a cultivator, a mass of cells resembling raw minced meat can be harvested and prepared.
All right, Chef Chris.
The moment of truth.
Let's do this. Here she is. Tastes like a chicken nugget. You did a great job as a chef with the exterior, but the interior is nice and soft. It's kind of spongy.
You like the chicken?
It was pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to say, it tasted like a chicken nugget.
Good. We'd rather people just say that than anything else. Almost be surprised that it's so normal.
How long will it take before it's on someone's plate at a fancy restaurant or at home?
The chicken's going to be happening hopefully before the end of the year. So we're talking
before
about,
the end of the year?
Yeah.
We only have a few weeks left.
I know.
Where?
So we're talking to a handful of countries right now. The key limiting step is the regulatory.
The regulatory.
Regulatory environments didn't contemplate the idea that you would be able to serve meat without killing an animal.
Last month, the FDA and the USDA agreed to share regulatory oversight of lab-grown meat products in the U.S.
So we just inked an agreement with a company in Japan. and they make this very, very high-end product called Wagyu, where we're sourcing cells from these phenomenal cows, and then using the cells as the building blocks to make a hamburger that we're hoping to put out in the next year, year and a half.
What's the biggest technological hurdle you have yet to overcome?
Well, it's probably the structure. You know, we didn't give you a chicken breast, we gave you a chicken nugget, you know, and we're not going to come out with a steak, we're going to come out with a hamburger. So it's a structured stuff. It's trying to figure out a way to weave together the muscle and the fat so it looks like a steak would look.
Just says it may be more than a year away from having its burger. But we learned that a startup in Tel Aviv, Israel, may have found the holy grail of cultured meat production, a steak.
The world's already seen hamburger meats, but this is different.
Yeah, that's different. Those are pieces of steak. We believe that for cell cultured meat to be a real option in the market, it has to reproduce the texture and the experience of the conventional meat.
Olive Farm's steak starts its life in this nitrogen tank. That's where the frozen animal cells are kept.
So first thing that you would need definitely over here is a tank, which is very cold. So using nitrogen, and you keep your, the cells frozen, okay, and that you could transfer now to another area, which I'll be showing now.
You gonna take us to the slaughterhouse now?
We don't have slaughterhouses, but we have cows. This cow is named Gertrude.
This is a cow named Gertrude, okay.
Yeah, and that's the second cow named Alberta. So this is Gertrude. What you can see in there are cells, which are actually real cow cells, which we have isolated from a real animal.
Is the cow still alive?
And we don't hurt the cow.
The conditions inside these refrigerator cows are meant to replicate the bodies of living cows, where cells naturally multiply.
So this is actually probably one of the, or maybe the first piece of beef tissue.
After roughly 3 to 5 weeks in Gertrude, these small beef pieces will grow into a thin slice of steak, roughly the size of a credit card. Most cattle are slaughtered after 2.5 years.
What we're going to try today are the first thin slices of steaks. Each meat cut you'll test today costs approximately $50 a piece. The taste and flavor are still, I believe, 60-70% on the way toward our goal.
You've gotten the texture pretty close?
Yes, not bad at all, and you can judge by yourself.
The company didn't want to show us a raw piece of steak. Instead, Olive Foods invited us to be the first journalists to try its steak at a test kitchen in Tel Aviv. When we arrived, Amir Ilan had already marinated the lab-grown beef.
Okay. And here it is.
Yeah, sauteed beef with mushrooms in teriyaki demi-glace and some microgreens with truffle soy vinaigrette.
This looks beautiful. Thank you, chef.
My pleasure.
Well, let's give it a go. It's pretty good, yeah, I have to say. It tastes pretty close to a regular steak. I'm not willing to say this is the best steak I've ever had in my life. Pretty good though, but it passes.
Olive Farm says it will take at least 2 years before its product is commercially available. Back in the States.
Okay, so I hope you all got an idea about how it's grown, how the meat can be grown in space or on Earth or wherever, it's possible. So what I want to say over here is raw food do have an advantage of unlimited supply. Once you get started with it, you can keep on growing it. There will be a lot of supply, right? So that is possible. But the disadvantage, it's time consuming. As you saw, like for the steaks to grow, it takes like approximately 2 months, you would say, that to a small credit card size. Or if you come to plants, they take a month and a half, depending on what type of crop you're growing. So it does take time. Okay, so what can we do about this? Definitely a combination of both is a good choice, right? For the initial days on your camp, you could have a processed food, whereas on a longer term, you could have raw food like we have at home. We have both the food at home, right? So it's not like whenever you're bored of cooking, you have those packed food, and when you're in good mood to cook, you have the raw food. Right. So, but at the end, what I would like to say is that the research on space food is very much needed. Okay. But we are so lucky on Earth, and we get ample amount of food. And so be wise. When you're consuming your food, be very, very wise not to waste it. Okay. So that's all I wanted to talk to you all about. So I think we can go for question and answers. If you have some questions, please shoot.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Anyone? So I can ask something, Ashwini. So one of the things that the students are going to be doing in this class is trying to figure out how to fit, hardware on their mission. And so when we're talking about growing food and some of the technologies you showed today, can you give the students any guidance or advice on like how to design a system and figure out how much it weighs? Because they have a mass allowance of 30 metric tons for the mission. So what do you think would be a good approach, I guess, for them to take, if you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, when you're coming to, like packed food, always try to take those which are nutritional. I mean, no need to take something, that consumes too much of space, like unnecessarily. So definitely a packed food, which is compact and at the same time, which is going to morally support the astronauts there, that will be good. But coming to growing the food is the best option, as all that you need to take would be seeds, right? Or like you saw over there, tissues, cells, that's all. So therefore, those things are much better to be taken. But yeah, definitely for that, you need, they need supporting things, like you saw nitrogen tanks, it might be, or for seeds, when it comes, you need a proper closed container so that the seeds are not contaminated or something. So therefore, those are the two things I would say. And coming to your camp, when you are designing your camp, you would go for the methods which uses very less, very simple construction materials. For example, aeroponics is a good choice if you think about in terms of weight and space consumption. When coming to like meat, definitely that needs quite a number of space, and energy consumption is high over there. So maybe on your initial mission, you could say, you would hold that, you would go for these two methods, then you can develop other methods. Okay, there are some questions also in the chat.
Yeah, I can ask you those. So
Sure.
the first one's from Carl. Is there a limit to how big cultured meat can grow?
Yeah, right now, as you saw, Carl, cultured meat do take time for growth. And you saw that it grows to a size of a credit card. That means that in 5 to 6 weeks. So it needs a long time for the growth, and a lot of the nutrients have to vary, right? So therefore, right now, yes, there is a limit. But as the technology improves and you keep making a research on that, definitely we can bring it to a good size.
Awesome. Next one is from Emily. What is packed food most common on ISS? I guess which packed food is most common on ISS, and what type can be most practical for a Mars mission?
That's a nice question, Emily. So the most common type is what I have listed over there. Among them, definitely rehydratable ones and irradiated ones would be the most. What would be best for Mars mission? I would say Okay, so depending again, coming to energy consumption, if I have to say, better not to go for frozen food or something that needs too much of, like oven kind of a thing, cooking kind of a thing is not something I would suggest, Emily.
Sure. Okay, they're asking a couple questions about weight of the equipment. So you may not know the answer to this, but maybe give it a stab. So Cian asks, would the equipment required to grow food in space be heavier than just bringing packed and processed food?
So Cian, as you see, definitely the equipments are heavier. But one way that you can make this possible is through some things can be printed over there on your Mars camp, isn't it? So 3D printing is a good option. Other than that, like supplying it for the very first time, you can have multiple initial missions and supplying it would be an option because packed food could be lighter when compared to these raw ones, but at the same time, how much can you supply, right? So there has to be an end to that. Therefore, good planning is what you would require. And as I said, 3D printing is a good method.
Yep. And then Antony asked a similar question. Could you give an estimate how much an hydro or aeroponic system able to feed a person would weigh?
Okay, so coming to hydroponics method, as you saw, it just needs some very lightweight composite or plastic tubes, and it needs a very simple system there. So the amount, as I said you, Anthony, so it takes like 30 to 32 days for say a lettuce, okay, and say a person consumes one complete head of lettuce, right, for every meal. I know it gets boring, but let's say, okay. So all that he would need is for 3 times, he needs 3 heads. So for a 6 months mission, you can calculate based on that. And each head weighs somewhere, I don't know, maybe less than a kilo. These are quite lightweight. I know the 3 weighs 1 kilo. So it has to be 1/3 of a kilo. That would be the weight. But that is something you're going to grow over there, and that shouldn't have any restrictions for your, but when you ask for the system weight, yes. So hydroponics or aeroponics are less in weight. So that shouldn't be a problem for you to think about it. Yeah.
And then Nathan asks, would growing meat be efficient considering the time it takes to grow only a credit card sized chunk and presumably significantly less calories being provided?
That's right. So as you see that it takes a long time and it provides less calories. That's very true, Nathan. But at the same time, it takes it takes as you like 2 years, 2.5 years for a cattle or any animal to grow. It takes longer time, right? And that when it is not a possibility in space to let the animals grow, that consumes more time. Compared to time, I would say it needs more system. So this would be a better alternative. Definitely an improvement in technology will definitely give us faster growth in meat too, like we see in plants. So that is possible.
Yeah. And one thing that you could take into account there, Nathan, and other students, is that maybe you send out the meat growing equipment on the first cargo mission without the crew, 2 years before the crew comes. Like that might be an option for this. It's similar to the time you're going to spend making propellant for the Earth return vehicle on a Mars Direct type concept. You'd send out the cargo mission first, and then at the next opportunity 2 years later, 22 months later, send out the crew. So you can take that into account as well.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a good wise decision there.
Any other questions, students? How will aeroponics work in zero gravity?
So that's true. No, definitely you can pump the water all the way up, but how do you get it back down? So you would need a kind of a vacuum over there to pull it down. So zero gravity aeroponics, it's possible to spray still. If you direct nozzles in the right direction, it's possible to spray it, but yeah, you need another system to draw the water down.
And just a note there, depending on what sort of mission architecture you're going to follow, you may not ever have the crew in zero gravity. You may be able to use artificial gravity on the trip out to Mars and back. And that's what Robert has in his Mars Direct plan, where he spins the HAB with its burned out upper stage and a tether and creates Mars gravity on the way to Mars. So that's an option too. Okay, awesome. And then last comment or question, I think it's from Sabina. Yeah, food will only be needed during the flight. They're also thinking food will not only be needed during the flight, they are also thinking of greenhouses on lunar Mars. That's true. And then she asked, what about space radiation? So how does space radiation play into growing food?
Oh yeah, true. That's right. So we need to keep a good track on the radiations that is being emitted, definitely there. So that's why I would always suggest to go towards, growing with the help of grow lights. That would be better, because nowadays we have these LEDs, they consume less power. So don't forget to use that in your camp, at least till, there are certain ways to also avoid radiation, but these radiations are to a higher level when compared to what we experience on Earth, right? So yeah, that would be the solution, I would say.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ashwini. This was wonderful. Thanks a lot for spending time with us this morning. And you're welcome to hang out as I bring on the next speaker. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you very much. It was fun talking to all of you. My God, that's a good amount of questions I also had over here. I would be very happy to help you all out with your design. So thanks a lot. Okay, bye-bye.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashwini. Okay, our next speaker, Dr. Geoffrey Landis. Geoffrey, are you able to hear me? And
yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Oh, hello.
How are things?
We're doing well. Yeah, we're having a great summer program so far. So Dr. Geoffrey Landis is a NASA scientist and a science fiction writer. He worked on several Mars missions, including the Mars Pathfinder, Mars Exploration Rover, Spirit and Opportunity. And he's also, so in his career at NASA, he's published over 400 scientific papers in the fields of photovoltaics and astronautics. He's also an accomplished science fiction writer, author of 80 published short stories and novelettes, and just under 50 poems. His novel Mars Crossing is one of my favorite books. And so welcome, Geoffrey. We're really excited to have you here as part of our summer program, and we're happy to hear what you have to say.
Okay, yeah, it's great here to talk to you. Sorry I can't make it there in person. Maybe next time. But I want to talk to you about Mars and in situ resource utilization. I'm sure you've heard a lot about ISRU already, but I'm going to talk a little bit, not about ISRU in general, but about one particular experiment to demonstrate ISRU, and maybe you can learn a little bit about the history of how hard it is to fly things to Mars. But let me stop and go back just a little bit and talk about the rocky planets.
Are you sharing some slides here, Geoffrey?
Yes, I'm sorry. I probably missed clicking the share slides thing.
No worries.
If I can get that. How do I share slides? I thought I pressed it, but now how's this? Let's see. Let's try this one. Is this okay.
Yep, that looks good. We see your PowerPoint.
Yeah,
it's the PowerPoint editor.
Yeah, am I on presenter mode or is
No, now we're seeing the notes.
Okay, let's see. How's this? How's that?
Perfect. That's
okay.
Good. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So let me back up and just talk a little bit about Mars. Mars is, of course, small, about half the diameter of Earth. It is cold, average temperature of about -60 C. It is dry, and it has almost no atmosphere. A lot of interest in Mars going back to beginning of the 20th century, but with the Mariner 4 mission, we discovered that Mars is not a planet with 6-armed thoats, and ancient Mars civilizations canaling water to the whole planet, but in fact was a barren moon-like desert. The Viking mission 76 changed that thinking a little bit with now an orbital view that showed signs of past water on Mars. So now we have a somewhat different view of Mars, that Mars has the past had water, and well, possibly there's water underneath. So here's our modern view of Mars. Ancient Mars is warm and wet. It had a thick enough atmosphere for water to be liquid, and it laid down these phyllosilicate and gypsum deposits that we can now see with many of the Mars rovers. At some point, it lost its atmosphere. It's still a little bit unclear exactly what happened, but the hypothesis is it lost its magnetic field because, being a smaller planet, it cooled faster, and then the atmosphere was stripped by the solar wind. Although I have to say that the atmospheric scientists are still hotly debated the details of how that happened. Then at some point, there was the Hellas impact event. The picture I'm showing you actually is the laser altimeter view of Mars, with the blue colors being low, the red colors being high, and you can see that giant impact, one of the 2 largest craters in the solar system. And it possibly also formed on the opposite side of the planet, the Tharsis Bulge and the Olympus Mons volcano. Then there was an era where we had temporary water and shallow oceans, perhaps. This may have been due to cataclysmic greenhouse effect, as large asteroids hit Mars, temporarily gave it a warmer atmosphere, and some of these temporary water periods may have lasted even for thousands of years. But the water was very acid due to volcanic gases. And then today we see the Mars that's cold and dry. There is abundant ice, often underneath the surface, unless you're all the way up at the northern poles. And it does perhaps have small amounts of transient water. So given that sort of background, let's go to Mars. And we all know that in situ resources are the key element to making a human mission practical. In fact, they're the key element to expanding into the solar system in general, not just for Mars, but everywhere in the solar system. We want to make things from the resources that are available. In the near term, what you really need is rocket propellant. Almost everything you ship into space requires an equal or larger amount of rocket propellant. Unfortunately, engineers are tremendously risk averse. They're thinking, well, if we do something that works, we may be on television for a couple of minutes. But if we do something that fails, we'll be testifying in front of a congressional hearing. So their engineers' motto before using any new technology is, yes, I love it, that's great, but I'm not going to fly it on my mission. So that's a tough barrier to flying new technologies. What we want to do is start small, start with a little demonstration, move on to bigger demonstrations. So what we need most, oxygen. Well, the most accessible resource on Mars is carbon dioxide, accessible because it's available anywhere on the planet. It doesn't matter where you land, there it is. And it turns out it's 72.5% oxygen. There's several different methods of making oxygen from carbon dioxide have been proposed. The 2 top ones are the Sabatier process, and this is the one that Bob Zubrin has been pushing, where you use hydrogen that you bring perhaps from Earth, are produced from electrolysis of ice. And in a heated and catalysis situation with carbon dioxide, you can turn it into methane, and the byproduct is oxygen. Alternatively, you can just directly electrolyze carbon dioxide. That's much like the process of electrolyzing water. You can put an electrical current through carbon dioxide, which has to be in some electrolyte, and then that will make oxygen, which you can burn with fuel brought from Earth. So this is what we chose for a demonstration mission, mostly because it's very, very simple. We could do it on a small scale, and it doesn't need hydrogen brought from the Earth. So let's go back to 1996, a long time ago now. But at that point, a lot of people, Bob Zerboot among others, Jim French, a lot of classic rocket scientists, have showed that really you can explore Mars far more effectively if you can use the local resources. That was no longer in doubt. Since oxygen is the largest fraction of rocket fuel, that was the most critical need. But although a lot of people talked about it, nobody was doing anything. Well, that's where Dave Kaplan came in. Dave Kaplan at Johnson Space Center proposed the human exploration plan that on an upcoming mission to Mars, we should demonstrate oxygen generation. Because he thought that only an actual demonstration on Mars could break through that roadblock where the engineers say, not on my mission. So that was a project called MIP, Mars In Situ Propellant Production Precursor. Well, it turns out we were in luck. Mars Pathfinder landed in '97, and it generated a high degree of excitement about Mars exploration. In particular, the NASA administrator made a commitment. He said, we will send 2 low-cost missions to Mars every launch opportunity. 1 lander, 1 orbiter. This will be the Mars Surveyor program. They would be small, fast, and cheap. So we had a mission. It was agreed to be a payload for the second of the Surveyor landers, the Mars 2001 Surveyor. All we needed was the experiment and a team to build it. Well, there was our ride to Mars. And there was the very first drawing of the Mars Surveyor lander showing that's where we would be, right there on the payload deck. So this is that carbon dioxide electrolysis method. What we use is, it turns out that the crystal zirconia, if you heat it to a relatively high temperature, about 750 C, it becomes an ionic conductor, and it will conduct oxygen ions. So instead of electrolyzing water, where water is a liquid at room temperature, we use the zirconia as the electrolyzing media and put a current through it at only about 1.5 to 2 volts. And you get oxygen out on one side and carbon monoxide out on the other side. So here was our ride to Mars. And there's a little inset showing our experiment, about the size of a shoebox on the MIP box. So in fact, to demonstrate this, we had 5 different experiment sets to demonstrate the key components of the in situ production. First, we had to acquire the atmosphere, generate the oxygen, characterize the thermal environment, because of course we have to get rid of waste heat, test out the solar array technology, and then actually we had done some calculations showing that dust accumulation could be a problem. So we're going to test methods of removing dust from the solar arrays. That is still a problem, and we still need to do that test. Actually, here's a picture I just like. There's a slightly younger version of me with a few of the experimenters building the hardware. So just looking at the pieces, Mars atmospheric acquisition and compression, collected it and compressed it. We decided in this experiment to use a sorption pump. Later, we switched to different types of pumps. This is a zeolite material that adsorbs carbon dioxide when it's cold. Then when it warms up, it pressurizes it and stores it. Of course, the oxygen generation is key to our experiment. It was designed to produce propellant-grade oxygen, and K.R. Sridhar, in contract to NASA, JSC, built that experiment. The flight unit, in fact, only weighed a single kilogram, didn't produce much oxygen, 0.04 grams per hour, but that was actually limited by the fact that we were only given 15 watts to run. The oxygen production rates limited by the power produced by the lander, and all we were allowed was 15 watts in the daytime. The radiator, at the time, we didn't have much experience with the thermal environment of Mars, so we're going to test radiators on Mars and measure the night sky temperature. We wanted to test solar arrays on Mars because, in fact, what in situ propellant production really is, it is taking energy and then condensing that energy in the form of rocket propellant, in our case, oxygen. So we wanted to test solar arrays on Mars. And then, of course, we wanted to characterize the dust and find out if we could use methods to remove the dust from the arrays. So there was our final flight hardware. Total mass of about 19 pounds, runs on 15 watts of power, and is about the size of a reasonable shoebox. So we fabricated our equipment, completed it, delivered it to qualification testing in preparation to be integrated onto the Mars Surveyor 2001 lander, and we were going to integrate in the summer of 2000 for our launch scheduled in 2001. And there's our spacecraft, actually. There we are, getting ready to do the testing of the spacecraft so we could fly it to Mars in 2001. Well, life intervened. In 1999, the first of the Surveyor landers crashed during its landing sequence. The 2001 Surveyor was an identical spacecraft. So they put the program on hold. Then the review board concluded that the whole faster, better, cheaper approach, small planetary spacecraft at low cost, was too fast or too cheap and ended up not being better. So the program was canceled. So that was the end of our test flight for oxygen production on Mars. Or not necessarily the end, because actually they flew the Surveyor spacecraft mission. They flew it as the Phoenix mission somewhat later, but when they flew it to Mars, it had a different set of experiments. So I have a little t-shirt that says my spacecraft went to Mars, but all I got was this lousy t-shirt. But although MIP didn't fly, the core concept stayed alive. 20 years later, it was incorporated in the form of an MIT experiment called MOXIE. And that was flown on the 2020 mission to Mars, landed in Mars February 18th, 2020, the Perseverance rover. And there it is, in the middle of the Perseverance rover, flown to Mars in 2020, is this experiment called MOXIE, designed to demonstrate production of oxygen from the atmosphere. So here it is, here's the pieces, and you can see a lot of these pieces are similar to what we saw before. Here's actually sort of a comparison, MOXIE to our experiment. It's a 17 kilograms, a little bit higher power. We had 15 watts. They were given 500 watts. That allows them to produce up to 10 grams an hour. And there it is, it worked. So on April 20, it produced 5.37 grams of oxygen, and later it's increased up to 10 grams per hour. So we have, in fact, demonstrated oxygen on Mars. Well, what do we do? How do we get from there to flying useful amounts of oxygen? Well, the first thing we suggested was to use that ISRU oxygen for a sample return mission from Mars. We could launch with empty tanks make the fuel on Mars. This was our design study of making oxygen on Mars for a sample return mission. And you can see how much the solar arrays have to be if we're going to use the power from the sun to make the oxygen to fly the launch vehicle. We chose a hybrid launch vehicle. We chose it so that the fuel is mostly oxygen. There you can see we're using an oxygen to fuel ratio of 2.8. So for every kilogram we bring from Earth, we have 2.8 kilograms of oxygen. We actually used the HTPB decaborane fuel, but this is a hybrid rocket engine where the fuel is solid and then the oxygen is liquid oxygen. So in fact, our study showed that either a single or a two-stage Mars ascent vehicle would work. We get all the requirements to launch a 5 kilogram sample, and we could do it with the MOXIE production rate that is now demonstrated on Mars with the 2020 mission. It has slightly better performance than a mission without using in-situ propellant. So it showed that we could use ISRU to pave the way, but it wasn't chosen for the NASA sample return mission. And that's because, as we said, the engineers are very, very risk averse. Well, I'd like to move a little bit forward, actually, and talk about resource production on the moon, because Mars is not the only place we're interested in going to. Again, oxygen will be the first element to be refined from lunar materials because it's the main component by mass of lunar soil. And as I've already mentioned, it's the main component of rocket fuel. Of course, one place to get lunar oxygen would be from the water content in the near polar regions of the moon, but that's only a limited resource. We don't want to use it all up, but we would like to make essentially rocket fuel and oxygen everywhere on the moon. But we don't want to make just oxygen. That's the first thing to be refined, but not the last. Eventually, we want a production material that can give us all of the raw materials for living, exploring, and industrializing space. So the footsteps philosophy is we start with the highest value product, that's oxygen, and then do it a way that allows step-by-step expansion. So one industrial product that we looked at was, can we make solar cells on the moon? They're valuable for all sorts of things, not merely expanding your moon base, but possibly in the farther future, even producing solar panels for space solar power. So the optimum regolith reduction process to make oxygen from rocks would work on just average soil. It would produce large amounts of oxygen. That's the main thing we need. It would recycle its reaction, the components we need to react, or else use reactants that are produced locally. And it would occur actually at moderate temperature. We don't want to go up to 2000 degrees in order to do our reaction. And finally, we want to produce not just oxygen, but also reduced metals, silicon, in a form that can be refined for other manufacturing processes. So what, in fact, do we want? We say metals. Well, of course, everybody uses metals as structural material. We also use it as wires. Aluminum's the clear choice. Calcium's a good product on the moon because it's a good conductor. We don't use it on Earth because it reacts with oxygen. We want to make glass. Of course, we need glass for solar arrays, ceramics for insulators, possibly glass or ceramic fibers. Turns out the glass forming material, silicon oxide, is abundant on the moon, but not in pure form. If we're going to make solar cells, we want to be able to make silicon. That's a highly purified product, so that will be further down the road. Finally, we have civil engineering material. a lot of the infrastructure on the ground is things like asphalt and brick. There's many possibilities, but we can use this slag from other processes to make much of the civil engineering materials. Well, why is it hard to get the stuff you want out of silicate rocks? It turns out silicate forms networks. So you think of raw materials as being molecules, but the silicate molecules are networks. They're strings of silicates that are thousands, even tens of thousands of atoms long. And you have to break up those chains of silicates in order to get the oxygen out. So a couple of methods. The first thing that we looked at is anion substitution. Silicate rock is silicon and oxygen. So if we can replace the negative oxygen ion with a different ion, we can break the chain. That has to be something further down in the electrochemical series. Proposed reaction might be to replace the oxygen in lunar soil with fluorine. Okay. Alternatively, we can replace the opposite. We can replace the cation. So we could replace that silicon in the silicate with another ion. If the substituted ion starts out metallic, you call this metallothermic reaction. Why we call it thermic is because if you pick your cation correctly, it releases a lot of energy. In fact, thermite is probably the well-known metallothermic reaction. So in the cation reaction, it's used on Earth for some things. And there's a little picture of a thermite reaction going on the Earth. So here's how it would work. There's a typical olivine composition. We add calcium to the magnesium ferrosilicate, produces calcium oxide, plus also the magnesium, the iron, and the silica. Another typical composition on the moon is calcium aluminosilicate. And again, you add the calcium, it gives you calcium oxide and aluminum silicide. Well, that still hasn't actually produced any oxygen. You still have to get the oxygen out. But turns out oxygen can be electrolyzed out of the calcium oxide. There's some details which I'm not going to go into here, but the net reaction is calcium oxide plus electricity can produce calcium metal and then producing the oxygen out as a gas. You can actually do these at the same time. You can add the calcium and also electrolyze it. You don't need to do two separate steps. So the products are metallic calcium. That's great, actually. It means that you're getting more of the reactant. So you don't even have to worry that you recycle the reactant with high recycling efficiency. And there may be other uses, but the remaining byproduct is mostly aluminum iron silicide. And we just need to refine that further, or possibly even just use the iron aluminide as a structural material. So the objective in the near term would be oxygen for lunar refueling. And in the far term, the object is lunar industrialization. Well, I want to talk about just one other thing on Mars. Of course, we can do all of these processes on Mars. We could reduce the Martian regolith, which also tends to be heavy in silicate rocks, and produce materials. Turns out on Earth, one of the most common materials that we use structurally is iron, and we may not have to do anything in order to get iron on Mars. Turns out, as we've been driving around Mars with the rovers, we've come across a lot of these little things. That's actually the first of the nickel iron meteorites we found on Mars, but by no means the last. We found about a dozen of these so far. it turns out just sitting on the surface of Mars, there are nickel iron meteorites with a mass of a ton and more. So for construction on Mars, it could be that Mars has been happy for us. Mars just has iron and nickel lying around on the surface, ready to be just scooped up, perhaps converted with a little bit of carbon into carbon steel, and then used. So, hey, Mars might make us happy after all. Well, I was told to keep this relatively short, so some quick conclusions. Our use of resources available in space is critical to expanding into the solar system. Moon and Mars both have resources we can use, starting with oxygen, which we use to make rocket fuel. But in the future, we want everything we need to live, work, and explore to be made from the resources we find in space. So we don't have to bring fuel, we don't have to bring any of our resources up out of the Earth's gravity well. We can just live with what we got. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Landis. Are there any questions, students? Question from Shreya. Can Martian regolith be used as a construction material?
Yes, undoubtedly we can use regolith or the components that are in regolith as construction material. My guess is that the first thing we'll have to do is refine out of the regolith some of the salts. Turns out Mars is a very salty place. Think of it kind of as if you had the Earth and you evaporated all of the oceans, what's left behind a heck of a lot of salt. On Mars, the salts tend to be sulfate salts, but also a lot of chloride, fluoride salts, and of course the ubiquitous perchlorate salts. So we're probably going to want to segregate away the salt components, but what's left will be just silicate rocks, and we can do a lot of things with refining materials out of the silicate rock.
Okay. Next question is from Brian. Why can't you just use hydrogen as the rocket fuel? Because it's less efficient compared to its alternatives.
Yeah, hydrogen turns out to have, the main problem is that it's hard to keep liquid. But yes, in the longer term, we probably want to switch to a hydrocarbon fuel. The one that most people are talking about these days is methane. And again, I have to give Bob Zubrin a lot of credit for pushing the idea of methane fuel on Mars. It's the lightest of the rocket fuels other than hydrogen. Hydrogen has about the density of styrofoam, so you need huge tanks to hold hydrogen. Methane's quite a bit denser, but also a reasonably good rocket fuel. To produce that, we would need water or hydrogen in some form. Turns out actually that despite worries early in the program, it's not that hard to find water on Mars, but it does mean that you're probably going to need to do some digging. You're gonna have to get out your steam shovels and dig underground. The first thing you'll have to do is, after you've dug it up, is you're going to have to separate it from the dirt. Then you have to melt it. You're probably going to have to purify the water, because as I said, there's a lot of salt on Mars. And then once you've done that, you can use an electrolysis process that will make oxygen and hydrogen. Then probably you don't want the hydrogen as the rocket fuel. It's very efficient, but it's hard to keep liquid. So you'll probably convert that hydrogen into methane. Methane is an excellent rocket fuel. Probably the best choice of rocket fuel for Mars. If you want, you could go on and convert it into higher hydrocarbons, take it up to ethane or propane or even higher hydrocarbons. These are denser, a little bit easier to store, not quite as high performance.
Okay, and then another question from Sabina. Can the ISRU mission be controlled completely from Earth remotely? Yeah, I mean, so she's also saying like the whole astronauts would be risky to send astronauts to Mars with an empty tank and no return ticket, right? So.
Yes, we think that the processes that we have been looking at can be run remotely because they're relatively simple. So we have controllers. So the controllers are basically programmable computers, and they know what the parameters are needed for making oxygen. For the Sabatier reaction, you can also almost certainly run it from the ground. Again, it's a thermal catalytic process. So if you have the hydrogen to start with, making methane and oxygen from hydrogen is relatively straightforward. In the worst case, you program the controllers to say, oh, if looks like something's going out of bounds, things are not what are expected, just hold on, stop making fuel, radio back to Earth, and have some of the Earth experts explore what the problem is. So we think they can be run remotely. If you're going to be digging up ice, it's possible that for that one, you might want people on site. That would be more like a mining operation, although there's several different possibilities here. There's a lot of different proposals for how to mine water on Mars. But the simplest way is simply find a spot where there's subsurface ice and use shovels to go down and get the ice. That possibly might be better done if you had some humans supervising. So that would be a more long-term thing.
And then Carl asks, if we can have ISRU on Mars, then why do we still need a refueling station on the moon? What are the pros and cons of either?
In the future, I think it's not a question of the moon or Mars, but I think it's the moon and Mars. We will be both industrializing and using the moon and also moving on to Mars, possibly as a habitat. So we'll be doing both. There's no choice that we have to make. We can go both directions. The moon has a lot of advantages to us on the surface of the Earth. Mostly it's just a 3-day flight away. It's easy to get to, easy to get back from. So very likely if we're making materials that we'll be using, for example, in Earth orbit, the moon would be the place to go to get to resources. As we go further out into the solar system, the resources on Mars we'll probably use for settling Mars, for all of the materials that we need for sending humans to go out to live on Mars as the first settlers, the first inhabitants of the expansion out into the solar system. So I think the answer is both, moon and Mars. We don't have to choose.
Yeah, I would say also for this, for the purposes of designing your mission for this class, it's probably a little simpler to just have everything happen on Mars.
Sure.
Okay, any last questions for Dr. Landis? All right, well, thank you so much, Geoffrey. This was fantastic. Really appreciate you taking your time today to brief us on this, and we really appreciate your participation with the summer program.
Okay, well, thanks a bunch for inviting me to come talk.
Awesome, thank you so much. So students, a couple housekeeping items. So we will have teams being formed this week. If you haven't already logged into Discord and answered the 3 questions, please do that. We'll also be sending out a handout in the next few days with all the rules and parameters of the competition and the mission design parameters. We've talked about them a little bit. Dr. Robert Zubrin kind of kicked things off, but we're just going to put it all into a handout for you to reference, so you'll have that. Tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday, Sabina and Nicole will be running the lectures. So Sabina and Nicole are both on the call right now, and they'll basically just be doing what I've been doing, introducing the speaker and facilitating the Q&A. Feel free to, if you have any questions about the program, you can continue to email me this week. I will be checking my email as well. And on Friday, Friday will kind of be a special one. Again, we'll have not only Dr. Jim Bell, who's a really prominent Mars scientist. He designed the cameras on all the rovers, but also Dr. Zubrin will be back on Friday to kind of close out all the lectures and talk about the competition a little bit more. So don't miss Friday this week. So with that, I'll say thank you to everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. All right, stop the recording.